Greetings to the Dark Continent. I'm speaking again today with Ernst van Zyl. He's a member of AfriForum. He's got the host of the Conscious Clerical podcast, among other things. And yeah, the topic today is the Kill the Boer, Kill the Farmer subject. I think the public has forgotten a bit about this because we've rescheduled the interview, given that we had both of us had a little bit of diary clashes. But Ernst, welcome back to my channel.
Well, thanks for having me on, Hugo. It's always nice to talk to you. And I think this is a topic that when you discuss it, it will actually lead to a lot of relevant themes that will stay relevant, even if the news story gets old. So I don't think that's a problem at all. I think a lot of the things that we'll touch on in the discussion are evergreen topics and themes.
Yeah, that's right. So I want to sort of get to it. I got the Reader's Digest version from News24, and obviously they always tell the truth and they always give an objective reality. But according to them, it's the Equality Court that's ruled that the quasi-genocidal song "Kill the Boer, Kill the Farmer," I can't pronounce the Zulu name, is not hate speech. Is that correct?
Yeah. I was there. I was at that court case. I was following it very closely and intimately. I was sitting there in court when Julius Malema was being cross-examined. And yeah, the Equality Court found that song "Kill the Boer, Kill the Farmer," or the chant is not hate speech. But AfriForum is now taking that verdict on appeal. Actually, tomorrow we will be in the Equality Court for our appeal application to see if we will be able to appeal. So that's actually quite relevant now.
So I just want to break down the logic and try to create a defense for the court. And it's always difficult when, I obviously don't agree with the judgment. I think it's absurd. But what was the argument that the Equality Court gave?
The argument was many layers to it. The one was the judge argued that AfriForum could not prove a correlation between the singing of the song and the killing of farmers. Now, that was never AfriForum's argument. That was never our basis for our case, seeing as the definition of hate speech is the incitement of violence and targeting in the South African Constitution. That firstly, maybe for your international listeners, just so they're not confused, South Africa has hate speech, and it's speech that is not protected by the Constitution. Hate speech is simply defined as speech that targets a specific group based on their identity, but also it needs to include incitement to violence.
Okay, so we put South Africans put a limit on freedom of expression,
yes.
Incitement to violence, and I think the other one is propaganda for war.
Yeah, propaganda for war. Yes, that's the other one. But it's much.
But that's never been explored, and it will be interesting. Actually, I often wondered if this is not also propaganda for war, or it's obviously propaganda, but war propaganda is a bit more specific.
Yeah. So when it came to the first argument that the correlation, it doesn't make sense. It's a very strange thing, because that's what the EFF's advocate argued, is that there's no correlation, but that's not what this case is about. If a politician goes out tomorrow and tells his followers to go kill illegal immigrants, and none of his followers act on it, he still committed hate speech, as according to the definition of the Constitution in South Africa. It's not dependent on whether someone takes action or not. Incitement to violence is the speech itself. It's not whether someone was stupid enough to do what you said, or radical or hateful enough to follow what you said. It's about the incitement itself. So that doesn't hold water at all. And then the other main reason was that, and this is also a bizarre reasoning, is that the judge said that the experts that AfriForum called, for example, Ernst van Zyl and Gabriel Kraus, he dismissed them as experts. Ernst van Zyl, and I'm oversimplifying for the sake of time and for the sake of keeping the attention of your audience, because it can get very technical, but Ernst van Zyl was dismissed by the judge because he had a vested interest in the case, which was also very strange reasoning, seeing as Ernst Roots is probably the most qualified expert on not only farm murders, but the correlation between hate speech and farm murders in the entire country,
That's right.
if not the entire world.
Ernst Register International also wrote a book called Kill the Boer, where he went into the statistics and the complex matter. I mean, it's a complex thing in South Africa. It's widely debated. And yeah, just briefly. So he was dismissed as an irrelevant expert by the Equality Court. Okay, arguably he is a member of AfriForum, that has to be said. So, okay, but I don't see why being a member of an organization should disqualify you, because then there's a lot of people and a lot of court cases that disqualify people. But the interesting one I get to is the correlation between, they could not prove a correlation between violence and hate speech. Now, my question is, what criteria did the court set out to prove that?
Well, there was no criteria explored, because that was never AfriForum's argument. We didn't even.
But I mean, a correlation is not causation, but
No.
correlation is also not causation, right?
No.
And the problem I have with that is, like, what does it mean if I commit hate speech in public? If I say let's kill people in public, most people are going to ignore me. If a politician does it, I assume more people are going to listen to him. I mean, I assume 90% of songs of hatred and words of hatred never result in murder or crimes, but it does feed the narrative of hatred eventually, and it maybe adds to 5, 6, 7% when a murderer decides I want to kill a farm murder. So it's just a weird thing. It doesn't sound to me like it's a meaningful criteria to begin with.
Yeah, no, it is very strange. And the thing is, that was never the burden of proof that was put on AfriForum, that we had to prove for it to be hate speech. We had to prove the correlation. That doesn't mean that that we didn't present evidence from farm murders to show that the brutality of these murders, and to really demonstrate the severity of the issue. I mean, this was definitely the basis of many of our witnesses that we called were farm murder and farm attack survivors. And then also, people that were affected by it. And this is to show the severity of the issue and why this should be taken so seriously, and why you can't just make the argument that, it's just heritage, it's just a song, it's just a metaphor. Now, I want to point out something that's very telling, and that's the fact that while I was there, on the day where we got the verdict that it's not hate speech, when we exited the court, the EFF supporters were out there chanting, "Kill the Boer, kill the farmer," in our direction, doing gun hand signals, shooting with their hands and slitting their throats with their hands. Just a metaphor. If it's just a metaphor, why are you doing all these actions accompanied?
That's a very deep metaphor over there.
Yeah.
I mean, there was this article, I think, by Zapiro, when I think it was Eugene Delblanc died or something, and they said kill the Boer as a metaphor, and then the two attackers came and asked what is a metaphor, and that sort of asked another question, like, let's say it is a metaphor. What does the metaphor stand for? What does it represent?
Yeah. I mean, the word farmer is quite literal. I don't know what the farmer, if you are saying to kill, if that's like saying kill a politician, but the politician is a metaphor for the system. I mean, that doesn't hold water.
Yeah, and I mean, you can do that with any hate speech case. Then we open up a whole can of words. So, look, I'm going to ask you maybe a deeper philosophical question, but do you think South Africa should have hate speech at all, hate speech laws at all? Isn't that part of the problem?
When it comes to the question of whether hate speech should exist or not, I think in a country as South Africa, within the parameters of it has to include incitement to violence, I think there is a place for banning speech on those very strict parameters.
But should it be banned legally, or should it be banned more culturally and just like people dissuade each other? Because I mean, every society has norms. Even societies like America.
I think it should be banned legally when it comes to inciting violence against the group, or inciting brutal murder of a group. I think that should be banned by the law itself. But there's another interesting thing that I think is also very prescient now, because I want to mention this with the while we're on the topic of this just a metaphor thing. There was a moment in this court case that was absolutely shocking, and that moment was when Julius Malema was asked by advocate Mark Oppenheimer. He asked them, "You said in the past that you're not calling for the slaughtering of white people, at least for now." And then he asked them, can you pledge in front of this court that you will never call for the slaughtering of white people? And then Julius Malema just outright refuses. He says, "No, I
Wait,
cannot
wait,
guarantee
that was the same court case.
That was the same court case, yes.
So how the hell can a judge listen to that testimony and come to that conclusion? I mean, the mental gymnastics is incredible.
Yeah. No, that was one of the shocking moments. I mean, the court went. I was there when it happened. The court went absolutely silent when that moment happened. And then Mark, Advocate Oppenheimer, asked him, because he said, "It might. I can't guarantee the future." And then Mark Oppenheimer asked, "Could it be you in the future that does it?" He says, "Yes, it could be me. It could be me." Basically saying it could be me that calls for the slaughtering of white.
But Ernst, that is metaphorical speech.
Yeah.
No. Hypothetical speech.
No, it's but and here's the thing that really, and here it gets into very abhorrent, immoral behavior. From well, you were talking now about how hate speech should be the possibility of hate speech being policed by social norms and by pushback and by shaming. When he said that, only one publication made that the headline of the day, and that was the South African. I commend them for doing that. All the other publications, all the other mainstream media publications focused on trivial things. The fact that, I mean, I'm not joking when I say they made the headline that AfriForum's advocate looks like Jan van Riebeeck, one of the publications.
What is the, like, so this is something that has been observed a lot in South African media. And it's not just South African media, it's international media, where it's almost like there's a social taboo about talking about farm murders in South Africa, or unfavorable. They call Herman Chomsky called this the unworthy victims. The Russians in the Donbass being killed is something very similar for the last 8 years, by the way. Just mentioning it opens up accusations that you support the war or you apologize for Putin. When you talk about farmers being killed in South Africa, if you talk about the Kurds being subjected to in Iran to oppression, for example, things of that sort. I mean, there are minorities or there are selected groups in the world that are unworthy of media attention.
Yeah, and that's what was one of the disturbing things, is that the media focused on and specifically, you're right, in regards to farm murders. There's actually been a study done by, and we want to publish it in a broader sense, by AfriForum, where we looked at how the media reports on hate crimes and on brutal murders, and our study found some disturbing stuff. If the race of the victim has a direct correlation with many media houses, with whether they report it or not, or how many times they report it or not. I mean, if you can just compare.
So do you put that down to, because do you think it's intent on the media's part, or do you think it's more like an ideological filter?
I think if you apply that question, you're going to have to ask it on a case-by-case basis. I think there's some media houses that are just they don't want to be too controversial. They know it's a controversial topic. They don't want to focus too much on it. And then there's other publications that just the statistics are so damning that you can't conclude anything else than they behind closed doors have an actual order that you don't cover these stories. You don't publish the story.
And do you know, in the cases where they do cover them, I mean, do they bring, I would say, equivalence to the emotion? I don't know how to really put it in a nice way, but like, when somebody's being raped in South Africa, okay, if it's a child, you obviously don't put a face, but generally you will show either the rapist to shame him publicly, his face, or maybe they will mention him, or they'll try and bring a dignity to the victims. Do you have any sense of how the media reports white farmers being killed in terms of their worthiness?
Yeah, well, the general trend is that they just don't report it. It's not even that they spare you the gruesome details or whatever. When they report it, they report on the details. But the other side of the coin is they just don't report on it, and then it creates an environment where people can become under the impression that farm murders aren't that bad, they're not happening, it's a conspiracy theory, whatever, because they don't see it anywhere, they don't see it reported, they don't get that exposure to the reality of what's going on. Meanwhile, the counterforce is they're being overexposed to all these cases of racism, all these cases of, or even many times, alleged racism. I mean,
But that is where the propaganda for war argument. Okay, now war is obviously the key word, which I think it won't maybe pass the South African court, but clearly the media is acting like a self-censoring propaganda machine by giving, by not balancing the cases in the same way.
Well, and in South Africa, I mean, with many of the way some of our journalists report to you, you'd have many of the great, the biggest dictatorships in our history would be salivating at the prospect of having a media like many of the media journalists that we have today here in South Africa. I mean, what dictator does not want to be called majestic? Let me ask you that. When it comes to specifically this environment that's being created, it's very dangerous because let me give you an example. It's just a rhetorical question. Most people know the answer why, but I still want to just have people think about it. Why is a story where a student urinates on another student's property? I mean, this is abhorrent behavior. It's not something I would encourage or play down. It's not civilized behavior. Why is that story the main national story and is the story that's talked about for months and on every front page? Or, for example, that whole hoax about the shampoo advert being racist that the EFF lost their collective marbles over, and then it turned out it's just an edited image that they freaked out over, or edited video. Why is that story the main story? It's on the front pages and everywhere. But an 80-year-old woman that has a power drill drilled through her feet in a farm attack and brutally raped and murdered. Why is that story not? Does that not elicit the same type of outrage?
It's censorship by omission, essentially.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And then the exact same thing applies to this court case of Julius Malema. There's a viral video that came out of this court case that I can't remember which. I think it's ENCA that made it. It's like the Julius Malema's best moments in court. It's one of the most immoral videos to have been made in a while.
And just for the international audience, Julius Malema is the guy who said he cannot rule out the possibility of genocide. I mean, I don't think you can say something more demeaning and directly, I mean, inciting violence, than that.
Yeah. And that news channel made an entire highlight video of all his best moments that make him look the best. It's not about these are the most shocking moments or these are the moments that most people are talking about. It's these moments are Julius Malema's moments where he looks the best, where
so
he is on
it's
top,
basically making him a celebrity.
Form.
Yeah, the celebrity TV star, basically.
Yeah.
A guy who calls for genocide.
Yeah. And it doesn't include the horrific things that he said. So I had to go. I'm not a journalist, but I had to go and write an entire document that outlines all of his most shocking and horrible things that he said, because nowhere else, just to create a source that I can source back to, so that it is somewhere there that they know that people can go back and see where it is with timestamps and everything. But I shouldn't be doing this. The media should be doing this. I shouldn't be sitting here documenting this stuff for people so that it's actually out there, so that people can't say you're lying. That's the other thing. I tell people about some of these quotes of Julius Malema and they don't believe me. When I did a stream on my channel a few days after the cross-examination, and I went through his entire cross-examination, all those comments that I highlighted, the worst and most like really heinous and disturbing stuff that he said. And the amount of people in my own audience that said, that was shocked, that didn't know, that said like, I didn't know that he said this. I can't believe I didn't see this or I didn't hear about this, was shocking. It really caught me off guard. The amount of people that just were unaware completely.
I've got an article here from 100 years ago that somebody sent today, because you know what happened in Italy with the the change of government, and fascism is now everywhere.
Mussolini's ghost is back in power. Yeah.
Mussolini's ghost. Anyway, so somebody, showed an article that the New York Times said 100 years when Mussolini came to power. So, just comparing it, were the media so objective and so critical as they are today? And the title was Mussolini, Hope of the Youth, Italy's Man of Tomorrow. Okay. That is what the New York Times said 100 years ago about Benito Mussolini when he came to power. It didn't turn out that way, did it?
No, absolutely not. This is something that can't be ignored. It's just the complicity and the media's complicity in creating the EFF and Julius Malema. I mean,
creating the movements they love to hate. Though I think actually with Malema, they actually have a secret sympathy for some of the views that he holds. Otherwise, they would have criticized them a long time ago.
Well, there was a very clear and direct vibe shift the day he started threatening journalists. Now, there are some masochistic journalists still out there that like being threatened with death and torture. But some of them, a lot of them did realize, like, what have we done? When he started like really going after journalists,
but
then it was too late. Then it was already too late.
Wolf. I want to get to the statistics about farm murders in South Africa. Do you have like stats? How many farmers are being killed a day? Like, what is it compared to the general population?
I remember the most recent one. So in 2021, there were 53 farm murders, and in I think in the last financial year, the statistic was roughly every 5 days there's a murder, every 2 days there's an attack. That's the average statistic. But I always do.
But then how does that compare to the general population? Because I mean, South Africa, and this is often the critique which goes against the story.
In South Africa, there's 57 murders a day approximately. But I always put it into perspective so people understand. Let's imagine this happened to any other profession. What do you think would happen if it was 63 journalists that were murdered in a year, 63 lawyers, 63 doctors? How about 63 primary school principals? Do you think people would brush it off as just normal crime? In 2021, 63 South African journalists were murdered. You really think they wouldn't say this is an absolute crisis that needs immediate attention and the whole world needs to know what's going on? Do you really think that they would look at this and say, "Oh no, I know this looks bad, but it's normal crime, you know. It's just we live in a violent country"? No, they wouldn't. There's no chance they would.
Well, but that's still. I mean, not to say you're wrong there, but just a bit of devil's advocate here. Journalists and doctors and professions are jobs that is seen as classy in polite society. Okay. Where if you compare it maybe to fishermen, you compare it to mine workers, for example, things of that sort. I mean, I don't know if you've got those statistics. I don't personally.
I don't have them on hand.
Or truck drivers or things of that sort. They would say, but look at that. How does the? I guess this is what the statistics you should look at. Is like what is the percentage of farmers of the total farmer population compared to the general population to other occupations? And I guess it's a good time for somebody to draw those statistics and say, look, this is really an issue.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And the other thing is, it's funny that you mentioned that because the same applied for COVID. Now you'll understand what I mean in just a second. Take the statistics of people that die of tuberculosis in South Africa per year, and then the amount of people that died of COVID. Why do we just brush off the TB deaths, but the COVID deaths just send us into a hysterical spiral? Well, no, not just do we get used to it, because the people that die of TB are the poor people. It's not people that I know. It's not people in my neighborhood. I'm not talking personally. I'm talking from the perspective of these COVIDians. It's not to put it very frankly, it is a poor man's problem, not my problem. That's why people don't care about it. And I just thought about that when you talked about the classy jobs and the more like working with your hands jobs. It's the same type of demeaning logic that goes on there.
Yeah, but I mean, all of this is explained to me through a classical media propaganda model. The Herman Chomsky model, probably the most easiest that is cited, where they showed very carefully the manufacture of consent in both editions. One that came out after 9/11, one came after 1980s, 1989. They showed clearly that the stories that the media shows empathy towards is a function of ownership, it's a function of ideology, and it's a function of US foreign policy, which is my biggest critique against the Russian-Ukraine war. Not that Ukrainians are unworthy victims, but equally so, the Yemenis have been suffering a genocide from an oil-producing country as well, and they're not even the same equivalence. And it's sort of, on a local level in South Africa, this is what I see as well, is that people in the media are probably detached from the farming communities. The Afrikaans media gives a little bit more credence to it than the English media does, because there's a cultural affinity towards it. And therefore, also, there's a little bit of an ideological filter in South Africa, where the English-speaking media does not want to entertain the possibility that perhaps farmers are getting killed, and perhaps the people who say it are not racist, far right nationalists. That's, you can sort of see how that narrative plays into it.
Yeah, there was a narrative that came out during this case that I found just very telling, where some commentariat in South Africa were arguing and saying AfriForum is just so racist and detached from Black South Africans that I cannot imagine that they would just be talking about in beeldspraak, in metaphor, would be speaking metaphorically. They always assume the worst. I'm like, don't you think you can use that same logic with you, where you can just say, when it comes to farm murders, you cannot imagine that Afrikaners can't just feel that they're threatened at all when people sing about killing them. You just think they can just take it. You just feel like
there's this inherent assumption here, which is that the Afrikaners are not human.
Yeah. It feels like, well, that brings back a lot of Boer War stuff. I read a disturbing article long ago in a museum, and I can't find it. It's obviously not online, but it was from a newspaper article from England, where just as the stories of the concentration camps were kind of becoming mainstream knowledge in England and had some pushback, there was an opinion piece, and I can't remember in which publication, but it pretty much said, you have to understand, these people are not Westerners anymore. They've Africanized. They can take a lot, basically implying they can take a lot more. They don't feel pain like we do. They don't suffer like we do. They can, you can put them in a camp and they will be fine, and they will get used to it. And
but this is the thing, though, and I mean, it speaks again to the propaganda. And I say 80-90% of this in South Africa, in my view, is ideology and media. It's sort of like the two are intertwined to it. Okay, farmers are getting killed, and AfriForum, or myself for that matter, and just for the record, I'm married to a non-Afrikaner, Middle Eastern Muslim, so that's sort of like the ultimate liberal type of family member, but I care about this issue. So there's sort of a perception in South Africa, okay, we talk about farmers getting killed, and then the media is like, we need the statistics, and we get the statistics, and facts come in, and we compare, and you sort of try and compare to the general population. We don't have good statistics here. It goes on and on and on the argument. But they never make that argument for any other statistic. If you say there's gender-based violence in South Africa, women are being beaten, nobody disagrees with that. You can cite any statistic, whether it's accurate or not. I mean, I remember when I was in school, there was a statistic that said every 16 seconds a woman is being raped in South Africa. And I looked at this up, and I'm a very mathematical person. I said, this is strong. This just can't be, I'm not denying that women are being raped. Every 16 seconds sounds a little bit high in my view. And I worked out the calculation. I worked out something like in the last 5 years, every woman in the country had to be raped something like 2 or 3 times for the statistics to knock off. Okay, so it just couldn't add up. And I remember saying this at school to kids, like, look, yeah, sure. I said it to our LO teacher. And I said, look, sure, I'm not denying it, anything of the sort, but the stats just doesn't add up. And automatically I was scolded at for denying, the experience of women. Okay, we don't make that argument or that logic for when the farmers are getting killed. It's the opposite. We want to correct and be accurate. So again, it speaks to that point.
Yeah, and no gender-based violence activist is ever called a propagandist. They're never called an opportunist. It's never insinuated that they're just doing it for the money. I think that's one of the most disgusting narratives that the media ever employs. And they all do it. They all deny that. But they plant the seed. They never outright say, like, AfriForum is just whatever, doing this for the money, or they're just doing it. They imply it very, very bluntly and directly. I mean, Pierre de Vos did it a while ago. It's like, by saying, like, for example, well, creating outrage around the issue is a very lucrative thing, and AfriForum rakes in the members, and that's what they need. I'm like, yeah, well, you're pretty much just saying me and my colleagues are motivated by pure cynicism, cold, evil cynicism, and we're exploiting.
My counter to him would be the articles he writes. Pure graft for victimhood. And I've written an article criticizing him about this, where I say victimhood is the biggest growing industry in South Africa.
Yeah.
And he is one of the guys feeding this. I mean, it's like the white masochistic, I'm sorry for the past industry is feeding the black victimhood industry. And like the one is enabling the other side. And that is also, it plays, I mean, it's probably a broader conversation, this one, but it plays into the narrative.
No, I call them the ethno-masochists. That's pretty much what they are. They're the polar opposite of an ethno-nationalist. But yeah, when it comes to that narrative, ek het al my moer gestrip 'n hele paar keer vir van hierdie ouens. Like, I've really lost my temper sometimes. Some implications or some accusations are just so heinous that I can't keep my calm. And one of them, and Stephen Grootes did it with Ernst Roots, and he also lost his temper at the end of that, but he put Stephen in his place at the end. There's a great interview where he did that.
What did he say again? Do you remember the words? Because it is stuck. I remember
Stephen Grootes implied that AfriForum is just trying to rile up people about a non-issue for their own self-benefit. And then Ernst, I
did
can't
you see
remember
when he said that, he had some doubt and he was a bit scared? Because I know he's doubting himself. He knows he's talking BS. He knows that narrative. Look, here's the problem I have with a lot of these guys, and interesting enough, when you bring up this conversation to a lot of Black South Africans, not talking about ANC or EFF, they actually far more empathetical, I find, about the white farmer situation.
No, absolutely.
But when you bring it up to some of the white population who have figured out that they can enable black victimhood by playing into the ANC's narrative, it's essentially how they got into power. That's Peter Vos, that's Stephen Grootes. You know, it's those cooperating with the Soviets and thinking they're not part of the system. Just similar type of thing. They have painted themselves into too many corners, and I don't know how to punt anymore, how to get out of it. That's sort of how I see them. You know, they are basically saying to an audience, they're preaching to the ANC audience with every response they're giving, because they don't want to open up the discussion, because they know they're bullshitting.
No, exactly, and that's why. Well, in the moments where I do, a lot of people compliment me. I do stay very calm when faced with these types of like heinous people, but I do often, well, not often, sometimes lose my composure, and when that happens, I pretty much just remind them and I ask them very directly, have they ever talked to the victims of these attacks like I have? Have they ever had to read through the stories of what has happened to these victims like I have? Have they had to console someone that they love over the phone because they were convinced that their parents would be murdered on a farm that night because people were trying to break into their farm?
And you know, not even the victims. I mean, I remember my parents stayed in Mafeking for a while on the Botswana border. And just the fear that is in that community, because they know they're going to be next. I mean, it's first of all, Afrikaners are a minority, as we are in a country. Minorities always feel threatened in any country in the world, even if they're well treated, like in Belgium. And then on top of that, the farmers form a minority among a minority, and they have high numbers of being killed. So you would expect them to live in fear. You know, and I remember seeing it, that these people were really scared, you know, that they're not going to, you know, they were dropping off their kids at school, for example, in the morning and saying goodbye in a way that my parents didn't do. My father just said, you know, drop you off and go. You know, it wasn't the same type of thing, because, you know, there's a higher level of it.
Yeah. And it's, there's something deeply disgusting about it. I just put it in the scenario where, for example, they're doing an interview with someone that fights against gender-based violence, and they just look that person in the face in the interview and say, you're doing this just for the money, right? You're not doing this for any other reason. Like, can you imagine how just morally reprehensible that is to do? That's just how distastefully and disgusting that is to do. But they can just freely imply that about me and my colleagues every day. They just like easily do it.
No, they're given a license for hatred, basically.
License for hatred and a license for prejudice. Prejudice, exactly as the word defines it, where they are assuming the intentions and the morality and the goodness of anyone based purely on their identity. They're assuming me and Piet Kroukamp of Vrye Weekblad, or as my colleague Rainer Dievenaar calls it, the Vrye Kotsblad, pretty much just attacked my colleague and said, like, yeah, he's just said he's just this racist. And I just thought, in his opinion piece a few months ago, and I just thought to myself, who gives you the authority where you're this guy with this audience, and you just look at this 20-year-old guy that you've never met in your life, this young man, and you're just like, yeah, I can go on a public platform and call this man a racist. That's pretty much equivalent to calling someone a rapist or a murderer in South Africa, seeing as you can go to prison for racism. But you can just go on a public platform and call a young man a racist.
And they can make the accusations without any evidence ever cited, or when evidence is cited, it's very flimsy. It's
No,
just their
because they know
opinion.
your heart. They can look into your heart and they know exactly what's going on there because they know
And
what you're
and
thinking
there's
based
never
on your identity.
but I get the impression that it is because they are scared of their own prejudiced feelings, and they're trying to hide
Oh,
behind their own
absolutely. No,
morality.
that's the indication I get as well. Where and I see it especially in that admission when they're like, all white people just need to admit that we are racists on the inside and we have these racist thoughts. I'm like, speak for yourself, guy. Don't pull
Yeah.
me into your moral dilemma. Don't pull me into as your cope for the fact that you have these racist and like abhorrent thoughts.
That to
Don't
me
use
is
me
like
as an
almost,
excuse.
it's almost like a religious stuff, because okay, let's assume we're all privileged and we're all racist, and we're all gonna make an admission tomorrow. We're gonna say we bow to the racial god, and we say all whites are privileged, Black Lives Matter, etc., etc., the whole mantra. Okay,
Whiteness is the original sin.
white is the original sin. I mean, the whole cult. Okay, I dug into it. If I buy into it tomorrow, okay, I don't think my wife's gonna like it when I say that, by the way. But be that as it may, um, what happens the next day? Does the inequality go away? Does the economy grow? Do we have electricity? Do we have water? No, none of that will happen, because the admission, and this is what irritates me about this whole woke ideology and this whole narrative in South Africa, is that taken to its logical conclusion, it will not solve any of the problems in the country. It is just a obvious distraction to people who don't have solutions.
Yeah, no, and that's the thing, and that actually, like I said, today's discussion is going to touch on a lot of broader stuff, and that applies exactly to Black economic empowerment policies as well. These racially discriminatory policies.
Oh, they're just rent seeking by another name. That's the way I see
Yeah,
it.
well, that and the fact that there's I always point this out when I go on television because I know everyone just knows that I'm speaking the truth and nobody can deny it. Pretty much, you have all these celebrities and the pretty much the elites in this country. All they do is talk about transformation. All they do is talk about BE and how good.
But did you
Good
look at
discrimination
which
is what we
houses
need.
where they stay? They stay in some of the
Yeah,
most whitest areas in the country, and as soon as
yeah,
immigrants come in, their narratives start changing.
yeah. But you should see how nervous they get when I point out that almost everyone watching, and when I'm on television, everyone watching this show right now, especially particularly the Black viewers, they're not beneficiaries of BEE. They know BEE is an exclusive club and they're not in it. And you know that if you don't constantly distract people with the narrative of the white man is behind everything and he's the evil that you need to go after, the day that people stop focusing on white people, they're coming after you. They're coming after all the
Well,
corrupt politicians and
yeah.
people that have benefited at their expense for years.
But this is the thing, like, and this is what I say about the whole BE things, even to an extent the white farmer thing. It is just a grift. It is just people who are entirely incompetent, who are in positions of power, who have adopted this narrative as a smokescreen to deflect, from criticism, because they haven't delivered anything. It's sort of like a kick of a dying horse. The sad part, though, is that innocent people are paying a price. I mean, the farmers who are being killed in South Africa cannot have even, dignity in their suffering, because somehow they are unworthy of the empathy of the majority of the population, because admitting that farmers are getting killed in South Africa somehow makes you the worst racist under the sun.
Yeah, but that is unfortunately the zeitgeist where we're living in, and it's the thing is, you are painted as a racist just by pointing it out, just by the fact that you mention that this is happening. And I mean, like I said, I've actually jokingly commented in many interviews where, call me controversial, but I think racially discriminatory laws are wrong in principle. And then
Oh.
you have a guy on the panel, usually some black nationalist leaning type of guy, that's just like, no, they're not wrong in principle. They're only wrong when they target the wrong people. I'm like, yeah, well, I don't
Okay.
even have to say anything anymore. You just keep talking. You just keep
Well,
talking.
the argument I would just make, if they're not wrong in principle, then they can only be right as vengeful, which is
Right.
essentially what
And
it is. It's vengeance. It's a disguise for vengeance, basically.
yeah, but you have to, if you can't admit or can't take the stance that racially discriminatory laws in the present are wrong, then I can't take your outrage about racially discriminatory laws in the future seriously. Either they're wrong or they're not. You can't pick and choose. If they're okay in the present, I don't want to hear about how they're somehow wrong in the past. That's
Well,
not how it works.
what gives me some hope and excitement is that there's a lot of people, especially in the international community, who have woken up. I can use that word these days. Become aware. Let me put it that
Yeah.
way. That this accusation of racism, I personally believe it was born and bred in Zimbabwe and post-colonial Africa, but it jumped to America. It became the woke ideology with the Frankfurt School and all the nonsense. England's got a bit of this. France surprisingly doesn't have it. And the reason why France doesn't have it is because France passed the law after the Second World War that nobody can even collect statistics on the basis of race. Okay, that's a French law. It's in the French constitution, can't be changed. And the reason is the Nazis did it to classify the Jews. That was a bad idea. Okay, so they universalized the principle. So it doesn't matter your religion or your race or anything in France. If you're Algerian who came here in the 1950s, if you're Pied Noir, which was a white Algerian, it doesn't matter, you're French. If you're a black guy from Guadeloupe, you're French. It doesn't matter, Under French law, everyone gets treated the same. And France, surprisingly, has none of this ideological drawback that the rest of the Anglo-Saxon world has got. And the reason is we go on and we get hung up by stupid statistics.
Yeah, well, that's the deep irony when it comes to South Africa, is that the ANC, and it shocks people when I point it out, it's like the ANC literally just took the racial classification of the previous regime and said, yeah, if it ain't broke, don't fix it.
Yeah, because it benefits them, because they were just, but that, you see, this proves something else, which is they were never sincere about the non-racial stuff. It was just a means towards an end for them.
Well, that's the whole genesis of the National Democratic Revolution, is that everything is just a means to an end, and that end is pretty much socialism. So the first stage.
Do they even believe that? Because I mean, if I look at the European socialists, they had some coherent ideology, whether you agree with it or not. The ANC, it's just they want to loot the country. That's the primary objective.
I did an interview yesterday on an American channel, and I made the point that you should not underestimate the ANC in regards to, don't just think that they're all just there to loot. There's definitely a lot of them to loot that are just loot, and they're there for a short time, not a long time, when it comes to as much money as they can grab in a short period. But the ANC is still filled with a lot of ideologues and fanatics, people that genuinely follow this stuff. They want to bring about these ideological ends that they've been pursuing for so long. They're in the absolute minority, and they're a growing minority within the party, as the party just gets crushed under the weight of people rushing to the buffet table while it's still there. But they are there, and you now and then you hear them, and now and then some of these cadres, when they speak, you hear the ideological possession. You hear this is someone talking from a point of view where they are ideologically
and you've made,
possessed.
and I guess this comes back to the Kill the Boer court case. I think Koos Malan made it on your channel, Professor Koos Malan, where he said that this ideology, it swept through the courts and through all the institutions of the country. Essentially, it didn't stop at the party.
Yeah, no, absolutely not. And that's it's actually very interesting how black economic empowerment policies and the sweeping through the entire all the institutions go hand in hand. So it starts with the universities, and the universities, this hateful race ideology is cultivated and bred and put into the minds of many young impressionable people, especially young black South Africans. And then through black economic empowerment policies, they're all just pumped into positions in the private sector, but they rocket through the hierarchy because all these corporations are just scrambling for representativity, meritocracy be damned. So many of these students are just thrust into very high positions of authority, and they all bring these ideas with them.
Well, it's South Africa is not unique in this regard, unfortunately. Maybe with that particular ideology, but if you take Europe, for example, that's been my critique against the environmental movement. If you say the right green stuff these days, you can become CEO in a few months in some companies. You just climb the corporate ladder. By I'm going to save the environment. I'm a protester. I'm an activist, and I get a lot of subsidy money from the European Union. And it's creating massive corruption, and it's resulting into the rise of incompetency when you prioritize ideology over merit, unfortunately.
Yeah, but yeah, that's actually a piece that I recently wrote for It's not published yet. I wrote it for Politics Web, specifically on the concept of South Africanization. So it's something a term that I use a lot, but not many people understand what it means.
Yeah,
But
I would disagree with South Africanization. I think it's something which is come and goes in human periods, and South Africa is just particularly struck with this one at this point in time.
Yeah, well, nonetheless, it's still a nice rhetorical tool to use in our present. People know once you lay it out, people start understanding what's going on. But why I thought about that now is we were talking about the interplay of many of these policies and many of these ideological positions. And the thing is, South Africanization works exactly like that. For firstly, it starts with the fusion of ruling party and government. That line blurs completely. Then corruption becomes compulsory. This is actually something James Myburgh pointed out very astutely when he said the point about corruption in South Africa is not that it is and was condoned, but that it has become compulsory. Excuse me? Excuse me, I didn't hear you there, Hugo.
Sorry, one commentator said Californication.
Oh, yeah, no, but Californication precedes South Africanization. That's what I tell the Americans, because that's where it starts. It starts off with the good times. You need that. You need the fat for the maggots to eat. That's pretty much how it works. So during after
just before that, there's this awesome quote by Edward Abbey called "There's science, there's logic, there's region, there's thought verified by experience, and then there's California." You know.
The second aspect of South Africanization is that corruption becomes compulsory, and that ungodly fusion between ruling party, government, and private sector, everything just becomes so intertwined that leads to the corruption becoming compulsory. And then also you have this overpowering racial agenda where the ruling party prioritizes their racial agenda even above something as crucial as a steady flow of electricity for their population.
Well, Europe is doing that exact same thing, not with the climate, but with the environmental agenda. I mean, Germany is the best example of this. It's like I'm still seeing Germans on Twitter tweeting saying, "Okay, guys, this nuclear power for this winter is a temporary thing. We promise we'll get rid of it next year. Let's trust our government." You know, it's something of that sort. And I'm like, just the insanity of what is going on. And I put all of this down, by the way, to the awesome quote by Arnold Toynbee, who I still think is one of the best historian ever, who said the primary driver of history is religion. And I think all of these, if you look at them, you know, as anthropologists, you would observe that this is religion. You know, it's just religion masquerading under another name.
Yeah, we actually had a great conversation on my channel about that, the green religion, where we went into that. So that's a very good point. But yeah, the at the end of the day, and I think this is the way to tie it all back to. I mean, we've covered a lot of themes, and that's what I told you at the beginning of this conversation. This topic evokes a lot of different other eternal evergreen themes that are applicable all across the world. But I think to tie it all back, what we're seeing with this verdict is just another notch in the radicalization of the South African political environment. And that doesn't mean other countries aren't radicalizing as well. Other countries are also, especially in the West, are absolutely going down the path of insanity and radicalization. They don't even know it. They're doing it under the cover of we are moderates and we are rational and we're doing this for the best of everyone, but they're absolutely radicalizing.
Yeah, they're utterly dogmatic. This is the thing.
Absolutely, the sign of the times with this verdict is that the South African political environment is absolutely radicalizing, and that minority communities have to start taking their own safety very seriously. Don't depend on the government to come save you. That's the silver lining to it, is that at least we are already putting the security structures in place to increase the safety structures that we have. For example, in the past month, we already averted, we have a record of already averting a farm attack near Brits, and we caught farm attackers near Messina last week. So we're getting the results, and we are, as the political environment radicalizes, we are intensifying our training and the amount of resources we're putting into community-based safety structures.
But what is the long-term vision then, if the state is crumbling and social structures, if you call it community-based structures, are reasserting themselves in the void left by the state. Where do you think this is going?
Well, this is going to firstly the just devolution of power that originates naturally and organically, and the collapse of the state around you, and the creation of, as Professor Koos Malan said, the creation of deserts of disorder with little oases of order within them. And this is where we're going. Those oases are going to be very small, and they're going to be very far apart, but they can multiply and they can merge and they can grow again. And that's step one, where we're going to have to start over again, is from creating order again from our own small capacity in a desert of disorder.
So it's a think local type of strategy at the end of the day.
Yes, and it's we're going to have to start over in many regards, where the old world is very rapidly fading away, and we're going to have to be the guys that start building for example, in the metaphor of building the cathedral, where we know we're not going to see it finished. We're probably, our children's probably not even going to see the end of it, as was the case with many of these European cathedrals. But we can lay the first stones of it, and we can start with the planning, and we can start with the building of it, because the world's going to need builders. It's not just going to need fighters. It's also specifically going to need builders again.
Because if there's a constant theme across Western society, if you can use that as a broader name, even if you include South Africa in that, there's an utter distrust of institutions. Whether it's public health, they can't respond to a pandemic. Whether it's the military, they can't even beat the Russians, but they can't fight a war with common sense. It's diplomats, foreign policy just seems to fall in flatters, So everything just seems to be crumbling, and the institutions seem to be hollowed out. So I guess you guys are trying to exploit that void a little bit and say, well, this is where there's room for energy and for a new way of thinking and addressing the problems.
The thing is, many of these institutions cannot be saved. Stellenbosch University will never again have Afrikaans there as a language of
or critical thinking.
Yeah, or critical thinking. That's because there's too much critical theory for there to be any critical thinking. But when it comes to what AfriForum is doing, we're proposing the alternative. Don't just depend on the name. Don't put all your eggs in the party politics basket. You're going to have to start building solutions yourself, and you're going to have to organize with people around you. And that doesn't mean you're going to have to start a massive organization tomorrow. A team is technically 2 people. AfriForum started with 3 employees in 2006. And at that time, 3 members. Now we have 300,000 members. This is what people need to understand. It starts somewhere with a team that you build. Start organizing. And the other thing is, what I try to encourage people to do is pay attention to what the powers that be, how they want you to live, and then you do the opposite. Look what they tell you to do, and then you live in the other way. Tell them, look at what they call evil. Look at the types of lifestyles and things that the powers that be in the establishment call fascist, and what they call evil, and what they call racist, and whatever. If that means starting a family, if that means going outside and hiking, if that means doing woodwork, getting a hobby, doing something nice, socializing, talking in person,
not all trusting the experts.
Yeah, all these things are the thing. It's almost like we're living in this mirror world, where if you actually do the opposite of what the establishment says, you'll be a lot more happy. If they say eat more bread, don't eat more bread, eat less bread.
eat more meat. That's the next battle that's coming.
The best example.
Yeah, no, definitely. Okay, we covered a lot on this. Just quickly back to the Kill the Boer for like the last few minutes here.
What the path ahead is with
what's going to happen with the court case, and then I suppose another question after that you can also respond to is, even if this court case succeeds or fails, what do you see afterwards?
So, well, the immediate future is now when we're appearing in court tomorrow to do our application for appeal. That's up in the air. I can't say whether it will be approved or not. If it is not approved, that is very concerning. Therefore, we will be putting more emphasis and focus on them. All our focus and everything will be put on just community safety. We'll realize that we're on our own as a minority community in this country, and that the courts will not help defend us against people, protect us from people that chant about brutally murdering us. but there's a very strong chance that we get the appeal application approved, and then the fight begins. And I think a court of appeal will definitely look at this case a lot differently. And I think that there, absolutely, I'm very positive that we will get a result where Kill the Boer is not just brushed off as it's fine to do. It will be declared hate speech. Then that's my feeling. But that's the next step. What was your second question?
Well, it's assuming that you fail at the appeals court, that there's another judge that finds some logical pattern to say it. What will be the response then? Because that effectively means that the state sanctions hatred.
Right. The response then is that we pour all those resources that we would have poured into the hate speech cases. We pour into community safety, and we pour into getting organized and intensifying training, intensifying the provision of equipment to all these teams. And if you want to go see what we're up to, I mean, nothing's being hidden. Just search on Google and on YouTube, AfriForum Proto Span. So Proto is PROTO and then SPAN. And you'll see all the training that we're currently doing. We're doing some very special and actually very intense training with people in all types of skills.
All within the confines of the law,
Absolutely, yeah.
Okay.
And it's all there. Nothing, like I said, nothing's being hidden or hidden away.
I must say that is one thing I don't miss about South Africa, is the fact that people have to be armed to the teeth to survive. I don't miss that at all. But it is a reality for South Africans. So, I defend the right to be armed. I personally hate guns, but, it's one of those things you have to live with in South Africa.
Absolutely. But yeah, needs must. And like I said yesterday on another stream where I was, when you're living in a first world country, specifically in the most affluent ones, you've got the luxury of debating whether something was real communism, was that real liberalism, what would happen if we increased taxes by 2%. That's nice when you can have that luxury of just debating theory constantly. But living in South Africa, living in, as Russell Lamberti calls, a de-developing country, we don't have that luxury. We are forced to work in the laboratory of pragmatism. If a theory doesn't work, we jettison that theory. Doesn't matter how loudly the disciples of that ideology protest. If the rain dance doesn't bring rain, you can't say we didn't do the dance right. It means you can't bring rain with a dance.
In Europe, we create a committee to figure out why it didn't work, and then another committee to fix what didn't work, and it goes on and on and on and on. So that's a different type of approach. Anyways, Ernst, I'd like to thank you very much for your conversation. For people to follow you on Twitter, Conscious Caracal, they should follow you. And where else can they follow you and your work in general?
Well, they can just 3 places. You can subscribe to me on YouTube, Conscious Caracal, Twitter, Conscious Caracal, and then if you want to read my latest piece, you can go to the website IM1776 and read my piece, Time to Dig Trenches. That's my recent piece on solution building in a de-developing country. And I think if you enjoyed many parts of this conversation in regards to solutions, you'll enjoy that as well. But thank you very much, Ihu. It's always very nice to speak to you, and thanks for the opportunity and the platform.
Yeah, thank you very much. And everyone, thanks for watching. And to your subscribers listening, please subscribe to my channel. Thank you.
Tot ziens, mooi loop.